Nervous as I was, I found the courage to ask my question. As a ghost hunter, what was the most frightening thing you recall from your adventures? I was sitting pretty far away from him, and yet, in spite of that, I watched his expression clearly change, a sight we'll never forget. The ghost hunter forced out a mild laugh. Hello everybody, I'm TheRubber. Today, we bring you a famous ghost hunter. Tell me what his scariest moment was. During my college years, a popular ghost hunter was invited to our campus as a guest speaker by the Student Activity Council. The paranormal is something I've always been fascinated with, so eagerly made my way towards the auditorium. Although I was unfamiliar with this ghost hunter, but his background impressed me, as did the plans he had on the horizon. The event was back in 2005. This man was small in stature, he had a receding hairline and a white beard. I was fascinated with his view of the afterlife. We were exposed to video footage of the investigations he went on. The ghost hunter's riveting photo collection was just as interesting as the stories he shared with us. The presentation ended with a Q&A session. I certainly didn't want to let such an opportunity slip through my fingers, so my hand might have gone up faster than anyone else. The ghost hunter spotted me, pointed and smiled at me, waiting for me to speak. Nervous as I was, I found the courage to ask my question. As a ghost hunter, what was the most frightening thing you recall from your adventures? I was sitting pretty far away from him, a significant distance from where the ghost hunter stood, and yet, in spite of that, I watched his expression clearly change, a sight we'll never forget. The ghost hunter let out a mild laugh, but it was clearly forced. He then started to talk about an elementary school he explored that had been abandoned. The hunter was looking for a poltergeist. Suddenly, his flashlight began to lose power. I recall being quite confused, as I didn't really find his story very scary, and I couldn't understand why someone whose career involved hunting ghosts would find such a mundane instance so frightening. The ghost hunter hastily moved on to another question from a different student. When the presentation was over, the students made their way out of the auditorium, not wanting to get caught in a crowd. I discreetly slipped out from another exit. It was there that I saw the hunter having a cigarette while sitting on a wooden bench. I had hoped he wouldn't see me as I walked by him, but no such luck. The ghost hunter shouted my way. I looked over at him as he patted an empty seat to his right. He invited me to the bench. After a moment's hesitation, I proceeded to walk over to the bench and sit beside him. I wasn't being completely honest with you, the hunter said to me. What I said was not actually the most frightening moment I have been through. Yeah, I replied. That's what I figured. The ghost hunter proceeded to tell me the truth. When I was a much younger man in the 1970s, something happened to me that I will never forget. I was still fairly inexperienced as far as paranormal activity went. I essentially took the jobs that others with more experience rejected. The people I worked for usually had broken minds or were schizophrenic. They thought that either kids were playing pranks on them or phantoms were chasing them. My work generally involved a routine cleansing before moving on to my next gig. I was quite ecstatic when I got one particular call though. The client I spoke to claimed that a demon was haunting his house. He went on about possessions and physical manifestations. He even claimed that multiple witnesses could back his story up. I felt that this job was one that would help me establish a name for myself. It was, in my mind, the proverbial breakthrough I was looking for. The only thing that concerned me was the teenage son that lived in the home. The individual I spoke to said that his son was possessed, violently attacking members of the family. The son attacked his older female cousin. Naturally, before I visited the home, I wanted to make sure I was completely prepared. Some of the things I brought with me included holy water, crucifixes, sage, and even a small loaded handgun. Sadly, when I got there, no paranormal activity was apparent. For the next 2 weeks, I investigated the home thoroughly. The equipment I used was cutting edge for the era. I spoke to the son, the one who was apparently possessed. From my perspective, he may have been psychologically disturbed, maybe even depressed. Possessed by a demon though? Not from my perspective. I told the family that a child psychologist would be better suited to help their son. On the final day of my stay in their house, the family took the boy to a psychologist I recommended. His parents came back before midnight, retiring to their room for the night. I spent some time by myself in their kitchen reviewing my findings. All that they described to me could have been dismissed as family hysterics. Perhaps they were in denial about their son's need for mental health treatment. Nothing felt out of the ordinary, except for the drains in the basement. That house was built in the early 1900s, and its immaculate condition was kept pristine. The character and woodwork of the home was meticulously preserved. The only updates it received were the ones that were necessary, such as electricity and modern plumbing. The only one area in the house that wasn't maintained was the basement. The clammy stone walls were gathering moisture, making it a breeding ground for mold and spiders. That's why it didn't surprise me to see this windowless room left alone by the family. Sure, it felt spooky, mostly because of the single light that hung from the ceiling and its broad cement floors. But there was nothing worth reporting about the room itself. The only thing I couldn't figure out, though, was why there were 4 large, slotted drains in the basement. The home wasn't a mansion, so 4 large drains seems unnecessary to me. As I sat by myself pondering this, when suddenly I heard a faint sound, a thump. I didn't give the sound a second thought until I heard it once more, this time louder. A staircase led to the floor above me, which winded up out of the kitchen's corner. That's where this noise was coming from. I didn't think too much of the sound at first. I just assumed it's from someone in the family. But when I looked up, I saw it. It was coming down the stairs. It wasn't walking or floating. It was just moving down the stairs straight at me. Whatever I was looking at didn't have any eyes. It was faceless. And yet I knew that it was staring directly at me. That's when I heard it speak. I couldn't tell how it was able to speak. It didn't even have a mouth. Maybe it had telepathy of some sort. I'll never forget the words it said to me.
"You know what he did to us."
I immediately bolted from the house, leaving the family alone with whatever that thing was. I jumped in my car and drove. I just kept on driving and did not stop for at least 30 miles. At that point, I realized the distance I had driven. I pulled the car over and gave the family a call from a nearby payphone. The family moved away afterward. I wasn't able to continue the investigation. My report stated insufficient evidence as the reason. Years had passed. I decided to conduct some research based on my experience. What that thing said to me was burned in my memory.
"You know what he did to us."
And later on, I would indeed find out what that meant. I researched old newspapers and managed to piece the story together. Long ago, a well-respected mortician had lived in the house. The mortician could not locate a place in the town to perform his work in. As such, he built his own home and office space. The bedroom was in the upper level, his funeral home was the mid-level, the basement, as you can guess, was the mortuary. That's when I figured out why there were 4 drains in the basement. Decades had passed when suddenly someone well-respected in the community was brought to jail. He was suspected of abusing the professional position he had with a moral cause. I couldn't find any more information about the incident, likely because of the crime's sensitive nature. I did read that the punishment this man received was essentially a slap on the wrist. After spending a brief amount of time in jail, the home was stripped of all value by that perpetrator and left town well before his trial began. No one ever heard from him again. I began to put the pieces together. This man must have been the mortician. The words said to me by whatever that thing was remained embedded in my memory.
"You know what he did to us."
The mortician had a burning desire to create a home that accommodated his business. The things he did to those human bodies in his basement were things I would rather not discuss. But at least now, I knew what he had done to them. I will never forget his expression. The ghost hunter said to me with fear in his tone. There is no color in the ghost, his face as he went on. His beard was all white, but barely distinguishable from his pale skin. I apologized for asking. He dismissed me and left. I feel terrible for making the ghost hunter relive that traumatizing moment. As time goes by, that ghost hunter eventually faded from my memory. That is, until earlier last week. I was moving into a new house with my new fiancé. After taking some boxes and storing them in the basement, I noticed a slotted drain directly in the middle of it. That's when I began to worry. And thanks to the ghost hunter, I may know why. Kunekune is a well-known Japanese folklore. It is said that the Kunekune looks like a piece of paper mannequin that is long, slender, white, and shaped like humanoid. It has been said that during hot summer days at lunchtime, the being can be found there. Most of the times it hangs around wide extended rice fields or acres, but in some cases that are very rare, it can be found over the open sea. Even on a windless day, it has wiggly limbs that will wriggles like there's a strong wind. Hello everybody, I'm TheRubber. Today, we bring you a Japanese ghost that you really shouldn't be looking at, the Kunekune. Have you ever heard or encountered any paranormal event? Let us know in the comment below. The Kunekune first appeared in different websites at the same time in 2003. Immediately after the first reports were published, people that believed in Kunekune started writing and collecting their own stories. You can see it as those inflatable arm-flailing tube men that are mostly used at the roadside. which they call them air dancers. Apparently, you can only see the Kunekune from afar. It looks snowy white in the countryside, while it looks pitch black in the city. It is believed that someone can go insane if they try to get too close to the Kunekune. The Kunekune will kill anybody who tries to look it up closely. Your best bet is to ignore the Kunekune because it will also ignore you. Traditional scarecrows found in rice fields and barely might be what was misinterpreted as Kunekune's appearance. In Japan, scarecrows are believed to be scary and can actually come alive if stared at for too long or at night. Even though there are a lot of versions of the story out there, these two versions are the most popular ones on the internet. First is the story of a boy, Kaito, who went back to his hometown with his elder brother during the school holiday. One day, at home in the countryside, when Kaito saw his brother was looking outside the window, out of curiosity, he followed the line of his brother's vision. Kaito sighted a figure standing on the rice field that was completely dressed in white. All of a sudden, the figure starts wriggling like it is dancing. The figure kept wriggling. It was becoming more vigorous, and no ordinary human could bend the way it was bending. He asked what the figure was. His brother replied to him, "I know what it is, but it's better not to know." At the end of the day, Kaito's brother developed mental illness. Second story is about the author's visit to his grandmother's house as a child. During the Ghost Festival, he and his elder brother were playing in the rice fields. All of a sudden, his brother looks at the scarecrow's direction. When the author looks at his brother, he sees a white figure far away at the back of the scarecrow that was moving from left to right. They thought it was an improvised scarecrow at first, but then the white figure kept wiggling even when the wind stopped. His brother could not believe what he was seeing, so he went back to get a telescope so that he can get a closer look at the white figure. All of a sudden, while the brother was making use of the telescope, he became pale and was sweating like someone who had seen something horrible. With fear, he dropped the telescope to the ground and told the author it's better not to know. Out of curiosity, he picked up the telescope, trying to see what his brother had seen. The author's grandfather stopped him. Immediately, his grandfather took them home. Unfortunately, his brother starts acting strange once they get home. He starts wiggling his body and laughing like someone who is mentally ill, behaving just like the white figure. By the time the author and his mother were ready to go back to the city, the condition of his brother had not gotten better, so his grandmother suggests that he should stay in the countryside. Upon hearing the news, the author started crying, knowing fully well that his brother will never be the same when next he sees him again. I'm sure you already noticed both versions of the story have something in common, which the two events happened in the countryside, and the victims are brothers, and the ending where we have the two elder brothers suffering from mental illness. My mind was still trying to process the horror. My heart pounded at a rapid pace, and I was unable to think or rationalize things. But my senses had returned to normal by this point. I could now hear clearly, including the clicking sounds my bike made, as well as the wind breezing past my ears. Unfortunately, the only thing I wasn't aware of was the other person biking slightly behind me. Hello everybody, I'm TheRubber. Today we bring you the Creepy Cyclist. Many years ago, I resided in Cambridge, a small city in the center of England. The city has a reputable university situated in it with the same name. I had a job and some friends in town. The city of Cambridge is environmentally conscious, and it is common to see people cycle to get from one place to the other rather than drive. I mostly visited my friends at nighttime. We would stay up late playing games, discussing philosophy, and thinking of ways to better ourselves. Sometimes our discussions would go on well into the night, to the point where the weather was quite brisk when I would cycle back home. Cambridge is very safe, and I rather enjoyed riding alone at night under the gleam of lamplights. On one night, though, I had an encounter with an entity that chilled me to the bone. It was 3 a.m. on a cold February night, down a quiet and long road that only the street lamps were lit. Halfway home, I began to feel uneasy. I felt like my senses were kicking into overdrive. I had been drinking before my ride home, and I found myself suddenly scouting for potential dangers surrounding me. As I turned into a street, I knew I wasn't far from my apartment, so I gradually started to feel relieved. As I was halfway down the street, when suddenly I saw a man with a dark jacket cycling approximately 20 feet ahead of me. I started to be alert again. because he just sort of came out of nowhere. I had been drinking, so maybe I just wasn't mindful of him at first. This man was cycling in a very slow speed, and the closer I got to him, I realized he was hardly even pedaling. At that moment, the street suddenly became eerily quiet. Moments later, I realized that I couldn't hear the mechanical clicks that my bike usually makes, nor could I hear any sound emanating from the man's bike. This aspect alone should have made me turn around and go the other way. I should have realized that this whole thing was totally unreasonable, but I chose to cycle towards the man instead. I was intrigued by the speed he was moving at, as well as the dark clothing he adorned. The closer I got, the better look I got at the man. He had a very unhuman face. It seemed like a shadow. When my eyes caught his, I felt like I was looking right into the worst part of hell. I only had one glance at him, and it made me feel lifeless, like I couldn't move or even speak. I could no longer feel my own feet that were on the pedal, and my bike slowly slipped off the slope, and the next thing I know, I was next to him. I was too scared to move or shout, and I was not able to pull my eyes away from his. Suddenly, the man shouted at me.
"The way you're going is closed."
His voice gave me chills.
"Go back."
The man said again.
"The way you're going is closed."
Those were the only words he said to me, but the sound of his voice in sync with his fiery eyes snapped me back into reality. I managed to use all my strength to move my frightened fingers, thinking only that I couldn't go any closer. I immediately hit the brakes and allowed the man to ride before me. When I stopped, he continued riding his bicycle and moved forward at his surprisingly slow speed. Moving at a disturbingly slow pace, he then disappeared. I looked all over. It was as if he blended in with the shadows we were surrounded by. My mind was still trying to process the horror. My heart pounded at a rapid pace, and I was unable to think or rationalize things. I rode home as quickly as I could while thinking about what I had just seen. But my senses had returned to normal by this point. I could now hear clearly, including the clicking sounds my bike made, as well as the wind breezing past my ears. Unfortunately, the only thing I wasn't aware of was the other person biking slightly behind me. Once I reached home, I threw my bicycle to the side, ran straight into my apartment, and refused to look back. The distinct sound of footsteps walking up the building stairs gave me another chill. I didn't want to turn around and see who it was. Instead, I made a mad dash for my bedroom, jumped onto my bed, and hid under my covers. I hope you enjoyed today's video. Have you ever heard or encountered any paranormal event? Let us know in the comment below. We will draw your story and share it with the world. Don't forget to click like, subscribe to this channel, and hit the bell. Please share it to your friends if you like this video. Thank you so much for watching, and we will see you in the next video. Bye-bye.